You are listening to the Practicing the Art of Small Business podcast with Shannyn Merlo and Julie Parker. Enjoy this conversation about business, leadership, and the self-awareness journey to great success.
Welcome, Julie and listeners, to Practicing the Art of Small Business. Julie, I believe, and we will be corrected if I'm wrong, that we are on episode 32.
Crazy, 32.
That's what my notes.
I'm going to believe you because I don't know.
Well, the reason you don't know, Julie, and for our listeners, you probably don't know either, but we've had a little bit of a hiatus.
We have.
It's been my fault.
Yeah, and I haven't been high during it. I don't think I've been high during my hiatus, but we have had a hiatus.
Had a little break. Break.
Yeah, we always need a little break every now and again.
Just a little.
Keeps life interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, just a little reset, just a little life reset.
Yeah,
And I wonder whether, Julie, given that we sort of talked about what the topic's going to be, it's worth giving a little hint around why it's been so long. Just a little hint. I'm not going to project too much of my emotional issues. I know that the past 31 episodes have pretty much been Shannyn's therapy sessions. So I'll try not to make this one Shannyn's therapy session. But in all vulnerability, for those people who don't know, my dad passed away earlier this year, and my mum has already passed away. And so it's been a challenging year for many reasons, fill in the gaps. And I suppose what's been going on in my mind, and that's why the break has been there, but what's been going on in my mind is a combination, I suppose, of looking back at my dad's life and being confronted with that whole, what does a life well lived mean? What gives our lives meaning? What and certainly I'm probably on the other side of it, but I was going through a bit of an existential kind of thing earlier this year of like, what does it all matter? Like, I'm also getting older, and I think as we get older, we're reflecting, what is it? So all of this has kind of come up. And as I was working through with my therapist, I have a therapist, I have a shaman, I have a Sherpa, I have all the things.
I have a Shannyn.
I was sort of talking about this. My life feels somewhat meaningless, especially as I'm confronted with what does meaning mean. And he hit me between the eyes pretty heavily and talked about a nihilistic, philosophy. And the philosophy is that there's a sort of this belief that actually in nihilism, our lives are meaningless, that in generations' time, no one's going to remember us. So really all this desire to find meaning is irrelevant because it's about finding, like, if nothing matters, then what happens when nothing matters? And so that's what I thought we'd talk about today, Julie.
It's going to be a big topic.
It's definitely therapy.
We just determined this topic like 1 minute before recording, so we're coming in nice and fresh.
We've studied nihilism for the approximate 30 seconds it took to find a quote.
And I hadn't heard of nihilism before. Sorry for turning a page here. It's made me remember something. And so when you read it out to me, I was like, depleted in hope.
You're welcome.
So, Shannyn, what is nihilism?
Well, I don't know.
Let's traumatise everybody.
Given that I've done my 30 seconds of research on it, I'll pull up a quote and we can just, as we normally do here, we can just run with the concept of it. How's that? Yeah. So if anyone wants to school me on philosophy, you are welcome to do so. But yes, Google is going to give me the answer. So Julie, Google has told me that nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless. So the philosophy is that the belief that nothing in the world has real existence, and the history of it is Russia. Latin is nil, is nothing. Early 19th century. yada, yada, yada. Actually, interestingly enough, I've just Googled nihilism, obviously, to be able to tell you what nihilism is. But there's an increasing trend searching for nihilism increasing trend of nihilism from the 1930s up to 2009. So we're increasingly, I wonder whether it's because we're increasingly trying to find meaning in our lives, but actually the whole idea is that from a nihilistic perspective, life is meaningless.
How does that make you feel, that thought of life is meaningless? It would mean something different. The meaningless would have a different meaning to different people. What's yours?
When I got hit with that, it didn't sit comfortably for me. Like when that concept of, well, Shannyn, why even bother? It doesn't matter anyway. I was like, and for those not watching on YouTube, that was me breaking down, having a cry.
She's got a good cry face. It's worth looking at that one on YouTube. I look sad.
Freeze that image. I think for me, as I kind of sat with it, it helped alleviate some pressure, actually, because I figured if nothing has meaning, then is there a greater opportunity for me to live more in the present and to be more, if my sole purpose is just to enjoy being on this earth because nothing else matters, then how would I live my life differently? So if I wasn't working towards a higher purpose, then what would I do differently? Would the pressure go away of like trying to live meaningfully and, I know, create an empire and all the rest of it? It all just comes down to, almost just being in that present moment of just enjoying every bit.
And I think, Shannyn, sorry to disappoint everybody, but I think that's the end of the podcast because you just come up with it. A life without meaning is living in the present. So happiness, is that the purpose to life?
Oh.
Full stop. Okay, see you later. I think this is a, what initially for me was like, oh gosh, how distressing, a meaningless life. Well, maybe that actually really clarifies what we're supposed to do with this gift of life, because we don't have control over the other people and events and circumstances around us. And what we do eventually come to is an acceptance of all of that and making sure that our here and now is peaceful and happy. Maybe happiness is the answer. Maybe that's the purpose. Maybe that's the reason we are here. Could it be so self-indulgent? Could it be so lacking in contribution to the world around us? Or when we are at our true happiness, is that when we do contribute most to the people around us?
Well, so I think this whole podcast is going to be about just throwing ideas up. Unless you want to land on a solution, feel free. For anyone
I think we already have, but anyway, we'll circle back around to the solution at the end.
But I think it's an interesting point, right? And I think this is where what's the book? Vishen, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, Vishen Lakhiani. He's a Mind Valley guy. Anyway, in that book, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, he calls things rules. Rules? I think that's what he calls them. They're basically BS rules. So they're rules that we've been told to live by, but actually they're BS. They're taught to us by others who are saying that this is how it should be, but in fact, who said it should be that way? So going back to your point around, does a life well lived mean that we should be contributing? Well, I think the should be is the rule, because it's like, well, who said we should be? Certainly, I think there's a lot of evidence maybe that when you're contributing to something bigger than yourself, then people feel better. But then we're going back to the original thought of like what makes us feel good in that moment. Are we just pleasure seeking? And is that what a life well lived is? So, on an altruistic perspective, there's that contribution, and we know there's sort of evidence that altruism isn't true altruism because it makes us feel good. When we do things for others, it makes us feel good. So it's still seeking pleasure by doing good things. But, Julie, my question to you is what if we're living with a negative contribution to society or others, or what are your thoughts on that?
Can you give me a bit of a framework around the negative contribution that I'm an asshole and so I'm making people feel bad no matter where I go, or that stuff's happened to me in the past that's damaged me, which it hasn't. Nothing ever damages me. I'm a completely happy person. And so therefore, because of other stuff that's not born from my soul, but because of the external world having an impact, then that has me playing less of a positive impact on people's world, or just kind of generally everything?
Well, I think I kind of want to keep going back that this is a real kind of existential get your smoking pipe out podcast episode, because I guess it's all about thinking, right? If I am someone who has wounds, either generational wounds or because I have to live my life not with a sense of purpose because I'm nihilistic, but I have to live my life that people are generally try to be good. People, are born with this idea of generally want to do good and be happy. I think that there's a lot of generational trauma that can come into it. Then obviously there's situational, trauma and, all of that not great stuff that we know about that can create an environment where someone is then in a space where they are not healed. They're I'm trying to say this without offending, but basically I live with the belief that people are generally good, and those who are not good have had lots of difficulties in their lives, and they're basically spending their time making life difficult for everyone else to validate their own sense of insecurity and what have you. So I guess going back to the contribution side of things is, if I have self-awareness that my contribution to others or to the greater good is not good, I create pain and I create hurt for others. Does it give me more or less of a right to feel like life is meaningless?
I think they have meaning in their life when they're victim or perpetrator or feel wounded. I reckon that's part of the meaning of life. Would meaningless mean that even when they've had a trauma happen to them, even that is meaningless to themselves? So is true meaningless when you don't actually stain any circumstance with a meaning, you don't attach a meaning to it, so it moves through you quite peacefully in essence.
Wow, that's really deep.
Yeah, and it's coming back to what you said. That's happiness.
So if I lived without meaning, then I wouldn't be projecting all of my trauma on everyone else.
If you didn't attach the meaning of that was traumatic, then the event is simply an event. It doesn't have an emotional impact. It doesn't have doesn't leave a residue. It doesn't have an output of disturbance to the outside world. It just moved. It just occurred like a breeze, like a summer breeze just flew past.
Wow.
May not feel as nice as a summer breeze as it's happening.
I mean, we could probably sum that up there, I think, Julie, because I think that's kind of profound for me, right? If nothing, which we've probably quoted before, nothing has meaning except for the meaning that we give it. But if life is meaningless,
It's worth repeating,
Yeah.
though.
So
I love repetition. That's how I remember things.
Should I say it again slower?
Oh, that's right. That was a good concept. Yeah.
I'll repeat it slower for those unable to listen at my speaking pace. Nothing has meaning except for the meaning that we give it. And we have talked about this because my little blue pen analogy,
right.
my blue pen analogy. Do I need to repeat that, or I probably need to find another?
Yeah, I think you do. Yeah, I think you do.
Probably should find a better one. But okay, the blue pen analogy for those, because I'm going to have to say it now I've introduced it. This is a blue pen. Depending on how the meaning I put on this blue pen, it might not actually be blue, but let's not get into that level of and it doesn't exist anyway because nothing is real, it's all atoms. So I mean, that's getting really deep, but let's just bring it up a little bit. This is a blue pen. If my experience of the blue pen has been that I use a blue pen to create art, then this is a thing of creativity and beauty and opportunity and innovation. If I'd been stabbed in the eye with a blue pen, then my association with a blue pen would be a very different experience. But I could choose to either see it as a positive or negative. It's the meaning that I've put. This blue pen is an inanimate object. It actually has no meaning except for the one that I've put to it based on whether I see it as something that's positive or see it something as negative. So that's the blue pen. Also, I'm sure there was an ER episode for those older viewers or older listeners where like someone did a tracheotomy with the blue pen. So it could be life-saving. It's a surgical tool. Like there's a whole, but this is the whole point. This, at the end of the day, this is an inanimate object, but it's the meaning that we give it. So if life has no meaning, and we're not even giving it a meaning, then nothing is real.
And it's a different reality for everything, for everybody. Can I throw in my Lefko method?
You bring on your Lefko.
Because it won't get out of my head. Now I have to say it out loud. Because I agree. And the example that I give around an event is simply an event. We're the ones that choose to put a specific meaning on it is the Lefko method. And so what's his first name? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But he gives the example of, Shannyn, if you woke up this morning and it was pouring rain outside, and I said to you, it's pouring rain outside, what would be the meaning that you attach to that?
It depends.
It's likely going to be, it's raining outside. If I go outside, I'll get wet. I might stay inside.
I was going to say it depends if I had gumboots and felt like playing in puddles, because then it'd be like, wee.
However, if I said to you, Shannyn, it's raining outside when you woke up in the morning, and it was actually the morning of your wedding day that was planned to be outside, and you've been planning it for the past 3 years, very specifically down to the last detail, and it required it all to be dry. Now what's the meaning that you attach to the rain? Trauma. Awful. Worst thing that could have ever happened today. This is my wedding day. How on earth can this terrible rain be falling on my wedding day?
Can I interrupt to just ask, can I still wear gumboots on the wedding day? Because that'd probably prove it.
It's a pretty classy wedding, let me tell you. Can we all wear gumboots?
I'm a classy lady. Sorry, go back to your story. Sorry.
And so what if then, another scenario, I came into you, Shannyn, wake up, it's your wedding day, wake up, it's raining outside. And as it happens, you're actually getting married in a country where rain on your wedding day is a blessing, considered a blessing from the gods, and it means that you will have a long-lasting marriage filled with love and children and happiness. Now what's the meaning that you attach to that rain? Gratitude, thankful, lucky that it's raining.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that didn't change was the rain. The thing that changed was the meaning that we attach to the rain. And since this is about whether life is meaningful or meaningless, it's meaningful when we put those attachments to all of these events in our life. That then creates our experience of life. The situations are the things that we can have no control over. So we're even with people that have had trauma happen to them. Maybe it's abusive trauma in their childhood. Maybe they've had a terrible accident and lost a leg or something like that. Maybe it's been they've contending with an illness that's going on forever. Maybe they've got a short life because of it. All the things that could happen that would be considered, that we have attached the meaning as a community, as a culture, as bad. That's that, we still choose to put that meaning onto it. The situations we can't change. The meaning we attach to the situation creates the emotional impact that it has on us. And then our resulting behavior around that. So if we say, no, I'm wounded, I'm damaged, these things hold me back, then certainly that's going to play out in our life. That's going to be the output of our life, because that's the input that we're putting into our brains, into our soul. But when you come across the rare person that, they've had this terrible thing happen to them, they've either had, crime or a trauma or whatever. And I'm thinking in particular about somebody on the speaking circuit, they lost both legs in their adulthood in a terrible accident, and they're on the speaking circuit talking about resilience and strength and positivity. And when this person was asked the question, would you, if you had your time over again, would you have preferred that accident not to have happened so you kept your legs? They said, no, I would have it happen again because my life is so much better because of it. Now, that is a classic example of a situation happens. It's the meaning that's been attached to it has absolutely been, it's been a trauma. But it's like that Tony Robbins saying, life is either happening to you or life is happening for you. The meaning that's attached to that event for some people is that's happened to me. So now my life experience is going to struggle because of it. But then there's other people like this guy that goes on the speaking circuit and says, no, I can see the opportunity in that. I can see the strength in that. I can see the positivity in that. And life is therefore happening for me. And that's where you can start to experience a greater experience of life. But without the meaning at all, there is just peaceful acceptance of it all.
Well, I guess that was going to be my next question, because I completely agree. It is how we kind of see the world and how we interpret our experiences that, I guess, colours our view of the world. But I guess there's that deeper thing of, what if I don't have a purpose? What if my life doesn't have a deeper meaning? What happens if I've got no keynote speech in my back pocket that I want to talk about my traumas to kind of, teach other people? I haven't got this higher purpose. I haven't got this higher life vision. Like, what do I do with that? And I think that especially, I was doing some life coaching back a while back, and something that did come up quite a lot is my life. What is my purpose? Like, really trying to unpack what is my purpose, because I think we've been told, I think a lot in the narrative is you've got to have a strong sense of purpose. That's why you get out of bed in the day. That's what drives your behaviors. That's what gets you through those difficult periods. But I wonder whether, and I'm probably overlaying a little bit of my kind of journey in here, because that sense of like, what is my purpose now that I've experienced this, and death is going to happen to us, and what do I do with my time here? How do I make it meaningful? And so there's this thing of like, I need to find a purpose. Why am I here? I've got to contribute. I've got to have an impact. And it's like, what if there is no impact? And therefore, I think we're just repeating the same thing. I just then live every day with the sole intention to have a good life by my standards, which might mean having fun and finding joy in everything that I do, and that I don't have to work for a bigger purpose, because at the end of the day, it's going to not matter. But does that then mean I'm not living to my full potential?
And does it matter?
Well, I think this is the...
It only matters if we think it matters. And I think that's the thing. If we think that we need to have a strong purpose to feel like we are living life effectively or the way we're supposed to, or we think that, I need to find out what my strengths are, because if I don't tap into those, and I'm wasting my life, or again, it's our personal thoughts that are making a reality so.
Mm-hmm.
And, the purpose could be, you mentioned before we started recording, legacy. Like how many people do you think actually leave this world leaving a legacy behind? What percentage do you think it would be?
Oh, and this is the thing, right? Because I was thinking about my dad, and did Dad have a legacy to leave? Again, doesn't need to be Shannon's therapy session, but was it a positive legacy? I exist, so of course,
obviously. Deserves an award.
but I don't have children, so therefore, is my life not worthy because I don't have that legacy? And so I think it's this idea of the billions of people around the world. Have a think of the number of people who have died today, and it certainly impacts those people who know those people. But do they really have a long-term legacy that they pass on? And did they live a full life in pursuit of purpose, or held them back through fear related to the stuff that was holding them back? So if I don't live with a sense of purpose, then do I not get held back by my fears? Because it's all meaningless anyway.
It's just so extraordinary. Because it can be situational as well. So there are certainly people that I am observing in the world at the moment that up until recently, they wouldn't have left any legacy that grew beyond the bounds of their own family and circle of influence. Their circle of influence now has become very broad, and their purpose has become enormous. And I'm talking about people who are really fighting for our freedoms at the moment with what I consider the overreach of government powers because of this, what they call now a pandemic, because they've changed the definition of the word pandemic to suit today's narrative. They've also changed the definition of the word vaccination and herd immunity as well, but we won't go down that path. But there are people now, and at the very start, such as Graham Hood, here in Australia. Graham Hood was a former Qantas pilot, and he was sacked because he resisted the vax mandate. And he has now become one of the many strong voices that is fighting for our freedoms and making sure that the people who would normally be smothered down have got a voice. And he has said many times, I had no idea this would come into my world. I had no idea I'd need to step up like this. I can think of half a dozen people in a second that now have stood up and are quite known, especially in circles that I work in, that didn't realise that they were destined to actually leave a legacy. A couple of years ago, it would have been to their circle of influence, but that circle of influence has expanded enormously now. So maybe it comes down to situational as well. Maybe we've all got the potential in our lifetime to leave a legacy, but it is possibly not up to us, I wonder. This is where you start looking at universe. And, is there a greater power going on?
Yeah, I think I don't have any direct reflection on what you've just said, but what came up for me was something written in the book, and I'm not going to the book.
The book, is it the Bible?
No. This book. So this
quite different.
Nowhere near the same as freedom fighting, but this book existential kink is blowing my mind. What it talks about is trauma and large-scale trauma. And she was sort of she suggests that maybe some people are born into the world, and this goes into that universal kind of thinking, and this isn't your jam, that's totally cool, but, there's always something that you can learn that might change your perspective. But this idea that some people are born into challenge and trauma in order to learn the lessons that then on a whole of, what do they call it, like a whole of society level, actually raises the consciousness of society. So we think of like our the gurus, like, I don't know,
Wayne Dyer and
so his
Louise Hay,
so those people who see the world in a new way and are able to communicate that actually raises the consciousness of the masses. And so maybe there is a bit of a individualistic idea, and maybe it's not a responsibility, but if you're open to just experiencing what comes up and kind of going with the flow to see whether there's something worth exploring, then that's where meaning comes from. It's a question mark at the end of it.
I think everything here has got a question mark at the end of it. No, you and I aren't sure about anything.
No, this is definitely
on this topic.
This is definitely. We'll probably almost need to do another intro to say, Julie, we're going to frame for our listeners. We're going to frame this. This was a weird session. So strap on in.
Because the other thing that I'm just thinking about now is that am I right to say that one of the things that makes us different from any other living thing on this planet is that we have an ego, a consciousness.
I don't think my cat's got much of an ego. She just wants a lap to sit on. That's pretty much
what we think about them.
That's her meaning. That's the meaning she has in existence.
That's right. And so if human beings, that's, regardless of our race, colour, creed, religion, capabilities, abilities, we all have ego. From ego comes all of the complications of life. Otherwise we'd be happy as cats. As content as a cat. Yeah. And so is the therefore purpose to life to experience all of the complications of life, and we attach the benefit or drawback to that, or experience both of that? Is it just a big game, a big amusing game for the universe, looking at us all running around, bumping into each other, sometimes upsetting each other, sometimes loving up each other, and we go, and they go, isn't that all very interesting? And the ego has been our greatest gift and our greatest drawback.
Well, let me go further on the ego and ego death. And what was I thinking about? I did have a profound thought. That was my purpose. I've done it. Something about that ego death that quite often we're so afraid to change because we so identify with this self-concept of who we think we are, which is that ego. And if I change, then who am I? Or if I don't have these beliefs around myself and how I see the world and what I believe is to be true and what I value and what I, if none of that exists, then what's left? And that then is a full mind, which then kind of comes back full circle, because if none of what I think, so that nihilistic religion doesn't matter, my cultural beliefs don't matter, the values that have been asserted to me don't matter, the rules that I've been raised with don't matter. If none of that matters, and within myself none of it matters, then I am, what am I? What am I without my identity?
Correct.
Look
Correct.
at the face for our YouTube listeners.
Ego has determined you be that way. So can I layer something else in there? Buddhist monks who devote their entire life just to being in that spiritual meditative state. They're not actually contributing to anybody around them. They're not creating charities or money or whatever you could call a contribution. I'm aware that I'm talking about contribution in very Western terms, but they're not creating families where they get connection either. They're not necessarily reaching out to the poorer of the community and making sure that they're well fed and sheltered. Their whole purpose in life for themselves is to be in that, to deepen and deepen and deepen their spiritual connection to God or to Buddha.
I like half of it.
Is that purpose?
I like that. I like half of that, but I wonder what would happen if again, taking that nihilistic view, if God, Buddha, whatever, doesn't exist, and like there's not a doctrine that I follow in order to be in that place, then what's on the next thing? Do you know what I mean? Like I identify as a monk. We're not getting into gendered identities or speech.
No, I will never be having that sort of discussion on this. Not from my, but you can. From my perspective, absolutely.
I have actually decided to identify myself as God, and so from now on, I would like.
So not nihilistic, but hedonistic.
So when people ask you, like, who is Shannyn, you can say Shannyn is God. That's just being respectful to how I identify. We should probably cut that bit out. But anyway, this is
no, I reckon we leave it in. I love
this is actually my new thing around like this ridiculous expansion of how I identify. Someone, because this came up, someone on my social media feed, I identify as B-E-E, and fairy. And it's really easy. Shannyn identifies fairy as fairy self. So instead of Shannyn identifies her as herself, Shannyn identifies fairy as fairy self. It's really simple. So I identify as God, and I am now God's self.
God's self. I like that. God's self.
Anyway.
I like it.
Anyway.
And to add that additional insight into what you've just said, for the Christians out there, God is part of all of us. And so you are correctly identified in a religious Christian term.
Look at me becoming religious in this conversation.
Yeah, you had no idea you're so religious. But that's an interesting thing as well, because I'm Christian, and when you are talking about meaning and purpose as a Christian, and it would be the same in other religions as well, that comes into it. That has a very strong interplay with what you deem appropriate as to what a good purpose is. Sometimes it could be more, I've got to have a good impact on the people around me. I've got to feed the poor and all that side of things. But it is also making me think about Charles, Gloria's husband. He's a big fan of Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller, I think he earned 47 honorary doctorates in his life. A brilliant, brilliant man. I think he died in the 1980s. But brilliant, brilliant man, very insightful. And he has said that we all need to do what we see as important in the world. So the Buddhist monk should be meditating and developing that spirituality. You should be doing what you do. I should be doing Graham Hood should be leading a freedom cause, because the world is so needy of so many things in order for it to function well and in a positive way, possibly, that we all can't be heading towards the same purpose. We must be finding our own unique purpose and being our own unique path, because that is in itself fulfilling the meaning of community life, of global humanity as well. But that's way away from nihilistic attitude.
Well, it's still, I kind of want to go back to the monk. The monk only has purpose because he's following a doctrine. And so if the doctrine didn't exist, what would...
See, you've done it again.
What have I? Sorry.
The monk is only fulfilling purpose because the meaning he's attached to what he does has purpose. So there is there will never be an agreed upon purpose that we should all be living towards, or meaning that we should all be living towards. It does come back down to, this is all about self, isn't it? The process doesn't seem to be designed to encompass what other people believe. It does end up just becoming about our own personal journey, purpose, and there cannot be any judgment over that.
Well, I think that's probably a great place to start to wrap up. I think it's about finding, purpose is about finding it for ourselves, but maybe there's an opportunity to learn, okay, if that's true, what are the influences that are driving what I think I should be, should is the magic word, that I think I should be putting there as meaningful for me, because maybe there are influences in there that are actually not that core value of self. And also to strip away, if all of these beliefs or all of these doctrines or all of these cultural references actually have no meaning whatsoever, what am I left with? If I get rid of the shoulds from myself and society and my parents and my teachers and my alumni and my partner and my children and all of that, if I got rid of all the shoulds, then what's left?
What you decide. Freedom, maybe. Freedom. Because we're no longer being controlled in any way by anything, because it's all lost its meaning. And this is I think this nihilistic definition, this concept, is something that is helpful to contemplate, because the awareness of the nihilistic concept means that we gain a broader perspective over everything that's going on around us. And it provides us with, rather than we are compelled to be a certain way because of all these external factors and historical factors, now I'm choosing what I believe in this moment. I'm choosing for the impact, the output that I'm going to be having from this point on, after I've released all of those ties. And that's a sense of freedom and pure choice, clean choice.
We went deep.
I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time. And it's interesting, when you first said that definition of nihilism, I'm like, I wouldn't want to touch that. That's not a nice place to be. But what a benefit that comes from it when you do delve into it.
Look at you changing in a podcast episode.
Just like that, transformation. Yeah.
Look, if you're listening, you need to watch. You need to see the transformation of Julie.
Bright lights are shining out of my eyes right now. I
literally was about to say, she's shining a little brighter at the moment.
That's right. There's an aura going on. That's
it. I think this was fun. I think that when dealing with, I think it is actually death. I'm sure there's a quote around death brings rebirth. And it's not been a fun journey, but certainly it's given me time to really think about what birth and not birth as birth, but what can be rebirthed from an experience of death. And I think having some of these conversations, Julie, what's fun about the podcast and why I'm so grateful that we're back here doing this thing is that we can actually have some of these very weird and wonderful kind of conversations that haven't really gone anywhere. I mean, you're enlightened. I'm
I benefit, so I'm happy.
I'm still stuck back there. I'm still stuck on the therapy couch, but that's okay. At least it gives us fodder for the podcast.
Oh man, it's tough to lose a parent. It's really tough, and I used to always, when my beautiful father left when I was 33, suddenly.
That was last week, yes?
Yeah, that was last week. Yeah. The immediate history, recent history. I used to think, have good and bad days, and I used to call it, some days I think about him in a very spiritual way, and they're beautiful days, and then other times I think about him in a very mortal way where, you miss him and wish he was still around and wish you'd had him for longer. Until you speak to somebody who's lost their father even earlier and you go, well, I'm pleased I had him till I was 33. That's it. It's all perspective. It's all the meaning that we attach to things, and death is exactly the same, but we need to move through it.
So, Julie, I think it's time to do the end of podcast, a rappity wrap up. Wiki. This went deep and all over the shop. And so if you are a listener and you got something from it, or you'd like to school me on nihilistic philosophy, please get in touch with us. We talked about what has meaning is the meaning that we give it, that sunshine and rain can be equally as positive. We talked about whether finding a purpose is useful or not, and whether contribution is useful or not. And it really depends on how you see the world. But at the end of the day, if there's nothing left and there's no ego, then you are nothing.
And that's freeing.
I think that, I don't know if that really wraps it up. I think because there was so many concepts within this podcast that are sort of very out there in the ether, it's probably hard to wrap up. I think everyone's going to take from this what they need. And we would love to actually hear from our listeners and our viewers on the YouTubes, what you got out of today's episode, this particular episode. How do people get in touch with us, Julie?
Well, they can just go to our website, practicingtheartofsmallbusiness.com, and through there you'll be able to contact us and let us know your thoughts. But absolutely, on this YouTube episode, just go to the comments and type away. Share your thoughts around
comment
it.
To us.
Prove us wrong, prove us right.
Yeah, please.
We don't have an ego about it.
I'll actually attach no meaning to your comment whatsoever, so I'm going to be great.
We could have quite the nihilistic comment section. There's nothing there.
In fact, if you'd like to comment that this was meaningless, this was a meaningless episode, we'd probably love that. It'd be awesome. We enjoyed it. I think, Julie, I always enjoy my time with you. It's so wonderful to be back.
I always enjoy it. And I'm loving coming back on board with it all. It's fantastic. I love it. Thank you. So wonderful.
Such a joy. Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you, listeners. We will catch you at the next episode.
Look forward to it, Shannyn. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.